This week, folks, Virginia resident Oliver Anthony released a song called Rich Men North of Richmond, which, as the title implies, bemoans the corruption of the political class and their indifference to the plight of poor and working people. It was the first song he ever recorded using professional equipment. His other music was recorded using only the camera and mic on his cell phone. This song quickly became a viral sensation and is now number one on the iTunes country chart, having displaced Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town. So you can see the needle is moving perhaps ever so slowly in the correct direction. But right now, this song is number one on the iTunes chart in pretty much a day. So we will take a listen to a little bit of this. This was tweeted out by many accounts. And so here we are. We'll just play a little bit of this tune here.
Well, I've been selling my soul, working all day, overtime hours for bullshit pay, so I can sit out here and waste my life away, drag back home and drown my troubles away. It's a damn shame what the world's gotten to for people like me, people like you. Wish I could just wake up and it not be true, but it is. Oh, it is living in the new world with an whole soul. These rich men north of Richmond, Lord knows they all just wanna have total control. Wanna know what you think, wanna know what you do, and they don't think you know, but I know that you do. 'Cause your dollar ain't shit, and it's taxed to no end, 'cause the rich men north of Richmond.
All right, so we'll stop there for a minute. That's verse number one. We'll play verse number two in a moment. So far, not much there that any of us would particularly object to. Overtime, hours for bullshit pay, even the lamentations about being taxed to no end. Like I've always said, I think working class people are overtaxed considering what they get for it. 100%.
Exactly.
So, I don't
exactly. You know what do you getting back?
Right.
That's why when we talked about Cornell West, I mean, my focus was purely strategic. Like, fuck them. What's your tax money going to?
National security with 800 overseas bases.
Right.
That's it.
Exactly.
That's it. That's what you're paying for.
Right.
So, and it's a manufacturing jobs program, as Chris had just pointed out in America,
it's
the farewell tour.
The strangling of the developing world. That's what you get for your tax money.
Right.
Exactly.
So I don't read that lament as right wing.
No, I don't either. All right, now let's get into a little bit of verse two.
Oh, his second verse, I think he starts thinking about Putin. Like he just literally starts saying, like, Putin is a guy. Like he starts doing that, and that's when
Putin is a strong leader.
Exactly.
Man for our times.
A man for our times. Yeah.
I wish politicians would look out for minors, and not just minors on an island somewhere. Lord, we
See that? I have no idea what he's talking about. I'm confused about that. I don't know anything about that.
Islands are safe and effective.
Yeah, they're safe and effective. I don't know what he's talking about there. I don't understand.
That really went over my head.
Went way over my head. I mean, I don't know. This is a very sort of down to earth song. You know, he's a kind of a salt of the earth guy, and to make such an abstract, sort of unintelligible reference there,
That's actually an assault on our democracy again. This is where it gets right wing.
Is that? I mean, I don't even know what he's talking about there.
Questioning islands? Yeah.
Yeah. What about? I don't know. Anyway, this is the part that most people had a problem.
It's not like we have an elite class of perverts or anything.
Exactly. Right.
folks in the street ain't got nothing to eat, and the obese milking welfare.
Oh.
God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for your bags of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down. Lord, it's a damn shame. What?
All right, then it goes into the refrain, and then it just basically repeats out. So we basically get what the song is there. And, you know, look, a lot of people latched onto the welfare bashing there, which I, of course, you know, don't like to hear, obviously. But
what are fudge rounds? What is that?
I don't know what fudge rounds are. Maybe that's
Tusker?
Virginia.
It's a delicacy
Southern
that's-
thing?
Is that a southern?
Yes, it's
that
like
a
it's a
Southern
little
delicacy?
Debbie delicacy in the South. Every single time the welfare checks get cut, you just see a throng, 300-pound people just ambling towards the grocery.
Yeah, there's a run on the fudge rounds.
Packed.
Exactly, first of the month.
Yeah,
right?
they don't get regular food for their children. They just get fudge rounds just over and over again.
So as you can, you know, probably tell from that, his politics are a bit of a mixed bag, right? It's a little bit difficult because this is not a Chamber of Commerce Republican type. He's not a guy who's like, well, you know, you should be happy with the wages that you have. They're actually too high. We shouldn't raise wages. You know, he doesn't, even in the, you know, swipe that he takes at the, you know, welfare queens, right? He prefaces that by saying we have people dying on the street without anything to eat, and then you have the welfare people gaming the system, right? It's not this like blanket condemnation or judgment
of
poor people, right? And that kind of resentment that working people feel is actually very, very widespread. And given the desperation that a lot of working people are feeling, you know, I never held that resentment against poorer working people. This you know, resentment that, oh, there's people out there gaming the system. Like, I never agreed with it, but I understood where it was coming from. It's coming from a place of pain, coming from a place of hardship, coming from a place where, you know, you feel like you're busting your ass and you're getting nowhere. In fact, you're drowning further and further. And that's just something that's very, very widespread. And, you know, one of the things that I just want to put up here, because he said in a subsequent video, I don't have the video, but I'll put up the slide and a quote. This was from the Billboard music article. This is a quote that he gave in a video. I remember as a kid, the conservatives wanting war and me not understanding that. And I remember a lot of the controversies when the left took office, and it seems like both sides serve the same master, and that master is not someone of any good to the people of this country. This is what I thought. See, after the 2016 election, I thought many on the Bernie left were sort of all in agreement, more or less, that Trump won not because there was this surge of racism and Nazism in the country, or because, you know, Russia manipulated people into voting for Trump. No, Trump was elected in 2016 because people like this guy, too many of them in too many places, felt too fucked over by both party establishments, and they would have, many of them, voted for Bernie Sanders in the general if they had the opportunity to do so. Given that they did not have the opportunity to do so, they voted for Donald Trump, and that was a completely predictable sort of democratic outcome given the circumstances at the time.
Right.
I thought we were all on the same page, and that guys like Oliver Anthony, yes, they have misplaced and misdirected class outrage and class anger or class consciousness, but that they have that class consciousness in them. And so what our job is to intercept them and redirect that class rage at the real enemies, which are not the welfare people getting the fudge rounds, but the bosses who are not paying working people enough to the point where welfare is not a system to game, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I used to work, I mean, the minimum wage in New York was $7.25 an hour, a 40-hour work week at minimum wage after taxes were taken out in New York State, paid about $240 a week. So if there's a guy on welfare who's getting a check for $200 a week from the government, what, you're going to blame him for not going to work? Why? I'm working 40 hours a week, making $240. He can work nothing and get $200. That means if he went to work, he'd be making an effective wage, a net effective wage of $2 an hour, because he'd be working $1 an hour, because he'd be working 40 hours a week for $240, or he can work no hours a week for $200. So that guy is obviously not the enemy. The enemies are the people who are not paying you enough money to live, which he recognizes in the beginning of the song. So I thought we were all kind of on the same page that we need to take that misdirected rage of the populist Trump base and figure out a way to direct that in the right way, which means we don't demonize people like that. We don't dismiss people like that. We don't mock people like that. We don't otherize people like that. We engage with people like that because they have more in common with us in terms of their outlook on the world and the country and what is wrong with it than the cowbell left. Right? But that doesn't seem to have remained the case, judging by a lot of reactions to this. So I'm just going to pull up a few different reactions to this song here. You have here, I want to go first to Chris Mattman, who is Matt Chrisman from Chapo Trap House. Again, these were the go-to Bernie people in 2016. Right. That's how their podcast blew up. Contrast the simpering, whining tone of this to classic working class anthems like Take This Job and Shove It, and tell me soyification is not a universal phenomenon. Now, I don't want to pick on Matt Chrisman, but if you look at him, he's pretty much the personification of soy boy. I mean, I don't like calling people soy. I've never have called people a soy boy.
That is such an incredibly fucking dumb take. I mean, this is the first I'm seeing this.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm really disappointed in that. I typically consider Matt Chrisman to be maybe the smartest.
I'm
so he's definitely the smartest of the Chapo guys for sure. I think he's very smart.
Yeah.
How is that whining and simpering and supposedly you understand the breakdown in American towns and industrial cities? Like, the Chapo Trap House guys have that critique. So how could you interpret that this way? That's incredible to me. That's what he came away with.
Yeah. Well, it gets worse.
I mean, it's so dumb because they're really different songs as well. I mean, Take That Job and Shove It. It's it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, and it was written in a very different America where people weren't really in this kind of pain. Like, that song is largely just about, that manager thinks he's cool, but I'm fantasizing about the day I tell him to fuck off. Like, it was just kind of, it wasn't really a class thing. It was, but in a much more humorous spirit because the stakes were not what they are now. People were not suffering the way they are now. It just wasn't about that.
The comparison is a working class song that urges on people to fight, and then a song that is more like a lament.
Right.
So those are the contrasts. One is a call to the banner of arms for the working class. The other is a lament of the struggles.
Right. Exactly.
And the other one, it's not even really. That's what I'm saying. If you put it in the context of the time it was written, and I'm very familiar with that song because I actually like David Allan Coe. If you put that song in its context and you look at it, it was more what they used to call a novelty song. The tone of that song is much more, wouldn't it be funny if this working class guy told his asshole manager to go fuck himself like everybody kind of wants to. You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying it wasn't even really a rallying cry so much as it was an entertaining little song. Whereas this is really a cry from the heart of a very different country than the one that was written for.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Here's Owen Higgins, who is the editor of Common Dreams, another progressive, left outlet. This guy is not super talented, but using his skills for evil. If it weren't for the dumb reactionary politics, his song would be rightly ignored. It's not, quote unquote, good.
All right, man. You got to let me do the fop voice on that one.
Oh, yeah.
This guy is super talented, but using his skills for evil. If it wasn't for the dumb reactionary politics, his song would be rightly ignored. It's not good.
Well, that is saying he's not super talented. So he's saying it's not super talented, and that if it weren't for the reactionary politics, it'd be ignored because it's not even a good song. Here's Risky Liberal with the elephant and the Ukraine flag. Rich men north of Richmond. Conservatives are so gullible, it hurts. Who supports coal miners' health and black lung benefits? The Democratic Party. Haha. Who raises the minimum wage, time and a half for overtime? The Democratic Party. Who supports unions? The Democratic Party. So that's just a random lib. I don't know who that is. But I just thought that was quite the funny take, especially since this minimum wage increase thing, I think a lot of people don't realize this, because obviously we all know that Joe Biden allowed the Senate parliamentarian to block the minimum wage increase this time. I think a lot of people have it in their heads that Obama raised the minimum wage because the minimum wage was raised in 2009 to $7.25 an hour. But that was actually in accordance with a bill that George Bush had signed 2 years earlier. That was just the scheduled minimum wage increase from an act that Bush signed in 2007. So actually, the last time a Democrat actually raised the federal minimum wage was 1997. When Bill Clinton raised it to $5.15.
Right,
At the beginning of his term, it was $4.25. So actually, in the past 3 decades, Democrats have raised the minimum wage once for 85 cents an hour.
Right, and they just broke a budding railroad union strike. Stop them from striking. Like, what support are you talking about? And also, you're reading a lot into this song, because if you look at his stated politics, he doesn't support either party. Actually, I went and I listened to some of his other songs before the segment, and he had one, I think it's called Doggone It, where he says Democrats and Republicans they're all the same. I've never seen an evil city-slicking bureaucrat that was worth anything. So he's not a Republican Party supporter. Like most people living in this country today see it as a corrupt uniparty, and don't support either. If you're fanatically supportive of one, that's what's really funny about how mainstream these people think they are. If you're fanatically devoted to either one of these parties, you're not the mainstream, you're the lunatic fringe. If the way you're evaluating that is where you are politically in regards to the rest of the country, most of us don't believe in either one of these parties. Most people are not these, fanatical Republican supporters. How many Steve Schmidt Republicans are there?
Well, I mean, if to address the song more directly, like, regardless of whether you think it's a good song, regardless of whether or not you think that there are some problems with it, with some of like the welfare stuff, the fact that it went viral, I think is the more important aspect to it. So remove the individual that sang the song, remove like some of those things from it, and what you are seeing is an increased consciousness that the system doesn't necessarily work. And even if I don't agree with all of his politics, I can still respect the fact that he is representing something that a large portion of the American population is feeling. And if we're talking about the so-called welfare, the fudge rounds of it all, if we're talking about that, then I would say that is where I would see it as like a reactionary type thing. Instead of blaming the system itself for putting people in that type of situation where they're maybe that alienated, maybe that disaffected, maybe that depressed, to where that's all they're going to do. You don't have an analysis of why people are trapped in kind of that.
Right.
If they do happen to be cheating welfare, which are very few people, it does happen, but it's very few. You do happen to be cheating that, then you're probably in a very desperate situation. And I mean, I think that it's for all of the working class to try to lift up everyone. I don't necessarily think that subsidizing fudge rounds is good for the working class. We need a strong and healthy working class, because we're the productive part of this society.
Well, that's the thing that I think is really important to point out, is that it went viral for a reason, because most people in America, right? What is it? 62% of Americans don't have $500 for an emergency if they need it. So most people in America are living paycheck to paycheck. Most people in America are fairly close to the wall financially, which means most people in America think they need to be paid more. They think most workers need to be paid more. They think politics is corrupt. They think the people in power are serving the wrong masters, right? Not the people, not the voters, but they're serving another master who, what does he say in there? Here, I'll pull this up again. A master that is someone, not someone of any good to the people of this country. That's where most people are at. And most people who are in that situation do harbor a certain resentment, whether they will admit it or not, whether they will speak it or not, whether they will express it angrily or not. Most people do harbor a certain resentment for people who cheat the system to get free stuff, right? Like they do. That's totally a natural thing for people to feel. I don't think it serves the left well or the working class well to hold that resentment against people, because it's a natural human emotion that they happen to be feeling. You can't hold that against a person. You can try and redirect that through engagement. Right. But what I don't understand is if you're Chapo Trap House, or if you're Common Dreams, if you're one of these outlets that really branded themselves as this progressive pro-working class alternative to a Democratic Party that turned their back on working people, then how could you not see this guy coming a mile away? How could you not understand where these guys are coming from? And how could you not see an opportunity in a moment like this, where a song like this catches fire and goes viral? How can you not see that as an opportunity for engagement to actually build your ranks politically? It's extremely suspect that these people are shitting on this guy, because what that tells me is that you're not serious about building any kind of movement. You're not serious about growing your numbers. At that point, just be a Democrat. Just be a Democrat, because functionally speaking, you're no different from the Democrats. Democrats are anybody who doesn't subscribe to this, this, and this. It's because they're ignorant. It's because they're uneducated. It's because they're bigots, racist. You had people trying to interpret this song as some sort of lost cause Confederate anthem because he said rich men north of Richmond. It was so obvious that the rich men north of Richmond were in Washington, D.C. Because, see, if you understand, Richmond is in Virginia. This guy lives in Virginia. Washington, D.C. is just north of Virginia, and a lot of D.C. politicians live in the North Virginia suburbs. Get it? Rich men north of Richmond. That's the idea. It's called a song. It's called a play on words. It's not the kind of song that most liberals are used to listening to, unlike, we are never, ever getting back together, or my poker face, my poker face. I understand that's the level of lyric writing that you're used to admiring so much, right? But this is a nice play on words that actually relates to his home. Yeah, right. Exactly, right? And so that's why he says rich men north of Richmond. But there were so many people who were deliberately, in bad faith, misinterpreting that this guy actually posted as a pinned reply to his YouTube video. Oliver Anthony Music actually posted this. Just to be clear, rich men north of Richmond refers to Washington, D.C. politicians. This is no way a knock against people from up north. That's the songwriter having to post that because so many people were very cynically misinterpreting it. I honestly, as soon as I heard the song, I knew rich men north of Richmond means D.C. and the D.C. suburbs, because he's a Virginian, and Richmond is a big city in Virginia, and D.C. is the city north of Richmond where all the rich men live. The people who want to control everybody, like that's obviously who he was talking about. So you have just cynicism and snark and bad faith interpretations, calling this guy a bigot, a reactionary, a this and a that. What he is the average person. And that's why the song went viral, because he represents the attitudes, opinions, and yes, resentments and angers and anxieties of the average person. The average person is a mixed bag. And if you're not willing to engage with that, then you're not really serious about doing politics. Right.
And if you're not willing to engage in that, you are never going to get them to a more radical politics.
Of course.
If you are not willing to accept people where they are and try to work with them and try to do any amount of coalition building or anything like that, then you can guarantee that your politics is going to stay the same for as long as you're alive, if you're just going to write everyone off.
Well, that's it. I shared this. And, most people got it. And basically my take was, okay, who do you think you have a better chance of getting behind Medicare for all? This guy or the cowbell left? Who, if your life depended on it, who would you pick? Who do you think you could persuade to go balls to the wall for raising the minimum wage? This guy or the libs? Or the cowbell lips. They'll say that they support it, but they don't care. They don't need it. It's not important to them. Now, I've said this before on the show. I've been all over the country, and my experience is that working class people are pretty much the same. New York, Illinois, down south, they have very similar attitudes, very similar resentments. I remember when all the working class people voted Democrat. I mean, you could not find a Republican in my neighborhood with a search party when I was a kid. You go there now, they all voted for Trump. They're all Trump voters. So when I hear this guy, I say, okay, well, this is the result of Bill Clinton. This is the result of Barack Obama. This is the result of pissing on the working class, not only pissing on them for decades in terms of policy and economics and trade deals, but projecting such an obvious, absolute contempt for people like this. Where did you think they were going to go? I see a guy like this, I feel the same way I feel when I see Matt Walsh. I can't prove this. When you look at the type of humor he has, it's a personality style that we always would have associated with the left. Very kind of pugnacious, anti-establishment, counterculture, kind of dry, sarcastic sense of humor. Matt Walsh had come up 30 years ago. He would have been writing for Saturday Night Live, right? But you come up today, when the establishment institutions that are destroying your life and the life of the people you know are liberal or presenting themselves as liberal, well, where are you going to go? You're going to be oriented towards joining the right, because that's who you're going to see as fighting against those institutions. It's also very interesting to me, if you look at some of the lyrics there, that refrain he keeps hitting, they want to know what you think, they want to know what you do. That's very particular to this moment and how a lot of people feel. Like some of those lyrics are kind of getting into some of that Davos stuff in a way, the feeling that there's this global elite that's very invasive and trying to tell you what values you should have and how you should live your life. Now, I hear that, and this is a critique that's very traditionally left. Like this kind of critique of society being this oppressive force that distorts reality, that's trying to control people and tell them how to live. That's a traditionally left point of view. And usually we think of the right as being the people defending the institutions of society against that kind of leftist cynicism.
But it's also a weaponization of the government issue, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about now, right? When you say we want to control what you think and what you do, this is January 6th is one part of it, but also, there is the perception out there that the government has turned on its own people. That's why Donald Trump is the favorite to win this nomination, right? And that's why he becomes a heavier favorite with each indictment, because people doubled down. People are not going to blink first. A guy like this is not going to blink first. And the throngs of people who he represents are not going to blink first, because they see this as an ultimate showdown of sorts, an ultimate battle. This is it. This is the final round. The country is collapsing. The country's going to hell. We can either go down swinging, or we can, go with Meatball Ron because he's more likely to because he's more electable, right? And that's just not flying with them right now, because they feel like this is a battle that they have to wage, and so that's what they're doing. And so that's I think that speaks to a lot of what that verse is about there.
I mean, I think that the him talking about they want to know what you think, they want to know what you do. You're right, Russell. This has long been a left critique. The left critique has long been that you have a structure of power that is primarily concerned with the narrative control. I mean, they were worried about the narrative about Vietnam. They've been worried about the narrative of the Korean War. They've been worried about the narrative of the JFK assassination. They've been worried about the narrative of Iran-Contra. This is not new. The narrative control is one of the only things that the ruling class still has left to them as a means of being able to manipulate society, because we've collapsed in the way where it's very much harder for the majority of people to have any type of mobility, class mobility, or anything like that. So we've taken away all of the reforms that were gained. Those have been slowly whittled away. So people are more and more left in the stagnation of essentially a dying empire. So the only thing that they have left anymore is control over the narrative. And so it is incredibly important, and it's not a new thing. I know that there are a lot of people that are kind of like picked up on it more recently. You know, the you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, and they've said, oh my God, what are they telling us? This isn't what reality is. But it's long been that way, where they are not
sure. You know what lyric I kept thinking of as a parallel, even though it's a very different song. If you look at the lyrics of Let the Sun Shine In, which was written very consciously as a kind of articulation of the 60s counterculture ethos, and they say, walking in our winter coats, wearing smells from laboratories, facing a dying nation of moving paper fantasy. And if you look at what's in that lyric, there's this rejection of an artificiality, right? Like, you're not wearing natural fibers, you're wearing polyester, you're wearing things that were made in a lab, and moving paper fantasy, it's an earlier version of we're living in this artificial media generated environment that's not real. So you listen to some of what he's saying here, and there's some of that ethos in it. We're living in this artificial world. We're living in this world that's inhuman, and it does in some way harken back to that counterculture's fixation on authenticity and naturalness, and how modern society had become completely detached from our human nature and our human needs. But now what passes for the left has not only been absorbed into that system, they've become the staunchest defenders of the establishment and of these artificial constructions of reality. In fact, they've come to champion a much more extreme vision of artificiality than I would argue we've ever had before in its postmodern influences. So, you know, you've got some of that old school Woody Guthrie kind of class-oriented folk in there, but you also have some of this earlier left counterculture stuff. And it's just another example of what has often come up when we get into these figures who are considered right-wing. It's very confusing because so much of their sensibility is drawing on ideas that, at least for 2 generations, we've thought of as left-wing ideas.
Please clap.